Going back to this particular situation with Artsakh, what do you think, as a historian, as someone who's so well versed in this situation, this conflict, and also Armenian history, what's the future of Artsakh, having lost so many territories, having the Russian peacekeepers, but also a lot of what I've been listening to online, and I know maybe it's in some ways might be one-sided or just from one perspective, but I've been listening to kids and families who have been saying, what's the point of going back to that region when it's so uncertain? Kids talking about how they're afraid to go back to their homes because they're just afraid to be in that situation where they don't know if they will be attacked in the middle of the night again. Whether there are Russian peacekeepers, whether they've done a great job over the decades in various other countries, that's besides the point. A regular kid, a regular family is afraid to go back to their home, and so many of them have lost their home because those territories are now taken. But the territories that are not taken, kids are afraid to go back, families are afraid to go back, they're afraid to rebuild because they're afraid that they'll be destroyed in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. What do you think the future holds for Artsakh, as a historian, as someone who knows the region so well?
Well, the first part of that, luckily for the future of Artsakh, its delineated borders have changed over the centuries, if that makes sense. So when Artsakh was the 10th, I believe 10th province of the 16 provinces of Greater Armenia, it had borders that the modern Armenian or the modern geographer would look at and be like, what is that? That doesn't look anything like Artsakh. I mean, it was very much a thin sort of province that went all the way up from Ganja and down through Gardman province all the way to what's now the Iranian border. There's a lot of, and it changed over time. When it was the Principality of Kachin, which was its own country, it enveloped a different geographical character. Of course, mostly inhabiting the same regions. Of course, Shushi, all these different places were part of it. Obviously, you can use Armenian churches as markers, just as far as years when it was part of different provinces or kingdoms. But over the years, its borders slightly changed. So the idea of the borders changing beyond the sadness of the loss of life and the loss of territory and the loss of homes is a somewhat normal occurrence, I guess, from an historical standpoint. Artsakh's borders have changed maybe a half a dozen times in the last 1,500 years. But to go to the human element, the second part of your question, I don't really blame them for the fear, except for the fact that I think the existential fear should be omnipresent amongst Armenians of the Republic as well, if that's the case. If you're worried about returning, I think you should be just as worried about living in Sunik. I think you should be just as worried about living in Tavush. You know what I mean? I see the area that's being left for the Armenians as being constituent with the Republic of Armenia in a way that I wasn't expecting it to be before we had lost all that territory. And the new situation with the newly drawn borders, in a strange way, actually connects what's left of it more with Armenia, maybe not geographically, but because it's less land, there's maybe more security in that, maybe, because it can be, I guess, patrolled or whatever. You have the peacekeepers. I mean, I guess that's supposed to be the reasoning, and you really have to tiptoe around this reasoning because there's a lot of sensitivity with it, and what could happen and what will happen may be two very different things. And like we were saying in a previous conversation, there are so many combinations of alliances that could change the situation just based on one little thing. But that's one thought. I think that they're not wrong for being afraid, because unfortunately, and I hate to even say these words, but the enemy has proven they can kind of do sort of what they want. The world will do very little. And that's why I say we only can rely on ourselves. Yeah. What will it take to arm the entire Armenian race? that may be, I mean, that's the thing that I see. Like, at some point, the world Armenians have to look and say, we're more powerful than we know. It's sort of what my poem was alluding to, even if it's on some hyperbolic level, and people can see it on my Instagram or whatever. And not to change the subject too much, but they can also see on my Instagram how they can contact UNESCO and get the Senate resolutions and things as well. I just posted it today, just for people who want to do their part and help how they can. But I don't blame the little boy and his mother for not wanting to go back. I don't blame the family. They've been through so much. I mean, to give another historical parallel, I was just reading today, because 387 rings in my mind constantly as an Armenian historian. Every Armenian historian knows 387, because 387 was the year that the Romans and the Sassanids basically said, okay, this is enough. We've been fighting over this too long. Let's just split it in half. And they partitioned Armenia right down the middle. Well, not down the middle. The Persians got the fertile 2/3 of the eastern side, and the Romans got the western side. The eastern side had more land, and the western side had more soldiers, and that's how they split it up. More hireable Armenian bodies for the Roman Empire to put into their soldiery. And that's, you know, I think about 387 over and over again, over and over and over again, which was not the first. It's just the biggest of the partitions, the most famous maybe of the history of our partitions. But I wrote in a recent post a list of some of the most prominent partitions in Armenian history. And unfortunately, I mean, it goes through our whole entire history. And to me, 2020, this is no different. This is another partition employed by the superpowers, put into place by the superpowers like it always has been. Doesn't matter if it's Rome and Persia, the Byzantines and the Arabs, the Russians and the Turks. It doesn't matter. It's superpowers taking the buffer state. The buffer state is always more valuable when you leave it alone. When you allow it to thrive. But again, greediness knows no bounds, and the world only gets more greedy as time goes on, especially the rich, powerful nations. I'm sorry to say, I hate to say, I come from one of these rich, powerful nations. I can say for a fact that people are getting greedier and more selfish as time goes on. And so this facilitates the continuance of a you know, something like this.